In the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, the Allies discussed what to do with Europe once they'd won the Second World War.
Well, it isn't a happy place anymore.
At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the war was not yet over. But Stalin, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed that Germany should pay reparations and be split into 4 zones of occupation. They invited the Soviet Union to join the United Nations, and Stalin promised to help fight Japan once Germany was defeated. They also agreed Eastern Europe should have free elections. In July 1945, they had a second conference in Potsdam. A lot had changed since Germany's defeat. Roosevelt died and was replaced by Harry S. Truman. Churchill lost an election and was replaced by Clement Attlee during the conference. There were open disagreements. Truman was angry that the Soviets demanded such high reparations from Germany. He also hated the fact that they were setting up a communist government in Poland.
The natural power of the universe is harnessed in the new atomic bomb.
Stalin knew America were developing the atom bomb and was angry Truman had failed to tell him sooner. In both conferences, the issues the leaders faced were the same, but by Potsdam, much of the goodwill was gone. Without a common enemy, the Allies no longer had to stick together.
In 1945, Harry S. Truman became President of America. He was determined to confront communism and reportedly said, "The Russians only understand one language. How many armies have you got? I'm tired of babying the Soviets."
We'll stand mean, we'll walk mean, we'll throw punches mean, and we'll do everything.
But Truman was not the only cause of conflict between the two powers. Their wartime alliance was wrecked by their huge political differences. They had completely opposite systems. America was capitalist, whereas the Soviet Union was communist. Capitalism is private ownership and the right to make money.
I named this ship Pride of Free Enterprise.
Communism is state ownership and the belief that wealth should be shared. America had freedom and a two-party democracy. The Soviets had secret police and a one-party state. Their leaders hated each other's systems. After the war, America wanted Germany to recover as a trading partner, whereas the Soviets wanted to weaken Germany and create a buffer zone against future attack. The collapse of the wartime alliance led to a Cold War.
$20 million Soviets died in the Second World War. So Stalin said he wanted a buffer zone of friendly states around the USSR to make sure they could never be invaded again. Even during the war, Stalin was planning to take over Eastern Europe. Communist groups from Nazi-occupied countries like Poland escaped to Moscow and set up communist governments in exile.
You and your colleagues are either communists or communist-inspired men.
And as the Soviets drove the Nazis back, they occupied large areas of Eastern Europe. Churchill agreed that these could be a Soviet sphere of influence. In the countries that the Soviet army liberated, communist governments took power. These governments controlled the army, set up a secret police force, and began arresting opponents.
Let go, you phonies!
Non-communists were beaten and executed. In 1946, Churchill declared an Iron Curtain had come down across Europe, and the Soviet power was growing out of control. Stalin called Churchill's speech a declaration of war and, in 1947, set up Cominform, an alliance of communist countries.
I think that was very fair coverage. Very fair, very balanced.
Alarmed at the rapid expansion of totalitarian interest in Europe and Asia, President Truman addresses a joint session of Congress.
America was worried about the growth of communism in Eastern Europe. So when the British told Truman they couldn't afford to stay in Greece, one of the few non-communist countries in Eastern Europe, America took over.
That's lovely.
And in March 1947, Truman told Congress it was America's job to stop communism growing any stronger. This was called the Truman Doctrine.
Greece must have assistance if it is to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy.
In June 1947, US General George Marshall visited Europe. He came away thinking it was so poor that it was about to turn communist. Marshall and Truman asked Congress for $17 billion to fund the Marshall Plan to stimulate the European economy. Congress agreed to the plan in March 1948 after Czechoslovakia turned communist, as they were worried communism would spread further. The aid was for everything, from medicine to mules, to try and preserve capitalist economies.
Oh, that's better. Yes, that's very much better. You're going to France, over to France. I think that's a song. Are you ready?
This didn't help everyone, as Stalin forbade the Cominform countries from applying for Marshall aid.
Like that.
I do think we want to welcome them without slapping them in the face with a whip. I quite agree with you.
At the Yalta Conference in 1945, the Allies decided to split Germany and Berlin into 4 zones of occupation. The Soviet Union took huge reparations from its zone in eastern Germany, but Britain, France, and America tried to improve conditions in theirs. Then, in June 1948, they united their zones into a new country called West Germany, with West Berlin as its capital. They introduced a new currency to help trade. The next day, on the 23rd of June 1948, Stalin cut off all rail and road links to West Berlin, starting the Berlin blockade. As Berlin was located inside the Soviet zone, he was able to cut the capital off completely from Western Germany. Stalin had his reasons. He felt threatened by the idea of a united, strong Germany.
Let go! Leave off!
Improving conditions in West Germany made the Soviet zone look poor, which made communism look bad. The new West German currency was stronger than that of East Germany. This meant that lots of workers were crossing the border to the West. This weakened the East German economy. The West saw this as an attempt to starve Berlin into surrender, so they decided to supply their half by air. This was known as the Berlin Airlift. During this time, a plane carrying supplies landed every 3 minutes at West Berlin's Tempelhof Airport.
Just another crazy thing in this very crazy situation.
On the 12th of May, 1949, after 318 days, Stalin abandoned the blockade.
It's a day of triumph for a band of men in the airlift who kept Berliners eating while they were held in an iron ring.
But the hostility between the East and West was far from over. As a result of the Berlin blockade, Germany was divided into West and East until 1990. The Iron Curtain became permanent, and the two superpowers began an arms race.
Because each side fears that if it doesn't keep ahead, the other will.